Well, I'm sure that all of you have heard the story of the woman at the well. Um, it's a good story. I actually love this story, but it's kind of hard to tell from a different point of view that you haven't heard. So I'm going to give it a try and see what we can do with that. I want to start out with, I want you to think about a story that happened in today's time. There was a woman who every day at lunchtime, she would drive from her office building all the way across town to this gas station. And she would do this over and over and over again every day. It was a daily ritual for her. She did this because she met her husband there. They had lunch every day. But her husband passed away. But she kept going. She would leave her office building, drive across town to this gas station every day. And one day, the clerk, who had seen her for many days, years actually, said to her, why do you keep coming here? And her reply was, I don't need gas, I just don't know who I am if I stop coming. Sometimes we keep showing up in places that we are just accustomed to. Not because we really need to go there or we really need that, but it has become part of our identity. It's become part of who we are. And so we sometimes will carry things like habits, impossible dreams that maybe we had when we were 20 years old. We might even carry expectations from someone, or we might carry shame. But we keep carrying these things around with us. And sometimes I think it's because we don't know who we are without those things. We've had them. They've become part of us. They've become part of our identity. So that's where we meet this woman at the well. We don't know what her name was, but I want to try to think about the story from a different angle, not from the angle of Jesus telling the story or from the woman's point of view, but I want you to think about what is left behind. John tells us that Jesus had to go through Samaria. And I don't think that's probably true. I don't think he had to go through Samaria. You know, geographically, Samaria is in the middle of Galilee and Judea. But there were many Jews who went way out of their way, miles and miles and miles around, so that they did not have to go through Samaria. Now, they didn't like to go through Samaria because the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom of Israel. And when that happened, some of the Israelites were exiled. But some of them stayed behind, and they intermarried with the Assyrians, and that became another culture. And it was a distinct difference from the Jewish people. So I don't think Jesus had to go through Samaria because there was no other way to get there. I think he had to go through because he had a divine appointment. And that divine appointment was at the well. So if you think about the well, there's so many stories with the well that is part of them. Isaac's servant met Rebekah at the well. Jacob met Rachel, and that started a whole new lineage. And then Moses even met Zipporah at the well. The wells are where there are changes. And In these cases, there are places where new relationships begin. And when God shows up, he can show up anywhere, in any kind of place, in any ordinary place. And this was an ordinary place in Jesus' day. But this well felt a little bit different. When the woman went, it was noon, in the desert, so hot. Nobody else went then. Everybody else went in the morning. It was kind of the community gathering place. You know, the women would come and they would talk to each other and have their morning coffee. And then they would go about their day. But this woman came at noon when she knew that there was going to be no one at the well. Who would come to the well at noon? She came all by herself. She came alone. And this is where we see a routine that she has. So she lowers the bucket, she fills the bucket, she lifts the bucket, she carries the bucket. That's her routine. Think about your routine. You have a routine every day. This woman lowered, filled, lifted, carried her bucket every single day. And we have that rhythm too. A lot of times the things we do might be practical because we have to do them because it's just the way our life works. Sometimes they're emotional. We do these things because there's an emotion attached to it. And sometimes we do them because it's a spiritual practice that we have. But we all have a rhythm or a routine. But her daily rhythm was more than just gathering the water. The routine that she had talks about her story. Jesus says she has 5 husbands, and the person she's living with now is not her husband. And I think right now, in that particular part, we need to be very careful about what we think about this woman. We have she's kind of been a stereotype. But if you think about the time that Jesus was there, women didn't have a lot of rights. Women were considered to be property. They were not recognized legally. They were married in their early years, sometimes teens, and they were property. And they had no value by themselves. The only value they had was if they had a connection with their father, their son, or their husband. So this woman probably did not have the power to divorce anyone. The power to initiate a divorce would have to come from a man. Maybe she was widowed. Maybe she was abandoned. Maybe she was infertile. Maybe she was discarded. So this woman may not be a story of immorality, but it actually may be a story of her survival. So Jesus consistently reaches out to those on the margins, not as a project, but as people in whom God's image is still shining, says N.T. Wright, who is a popular theologian. Jesus meets her in the present, and when she arrives, Jesus is already at the well. Jesus is tired, he's thirsty, he's tired from walking, he's waiting. And all Jesus said is, "Give me a drink." That breaks every rule there was then. A man talking to a woman, a Samaritan talking to a Jew, a rabbi talking to someone of her stature. Jesus asks for something. Now, he places himself in a position of need. He needed something from her. And he asked her He asks her, give me this drink. So it puts her in a position of power and him in a position of vulnerability. Henry Nouwen says, God chooses to reveal himself in vulnerability, not in power, but in weakness. So now think about this. The Son of God is thirsty at the well. This woman is an outcast, and no one else wants anything to do with her. But she provides the water that he needs. Jesus could have drawn the water himself. Without her, he could have performed a miracle. But instead, he chose something that we talk about here a lot. He chose relationship. He won this woman's heart and trust by humbling himself. He named his need, his thirst, and he asked her for something that she could actually give him. Isn't it nice to give somebody something? Makes you feel good. She pushes back a little bit because she's kind of wondering what's happening here. She says, how is that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a Samaritan woman? And right then, that's a statement that shatters a lot of boundaries. So she names the boundary, she names the tension, and she names the history between the Samaritans and the Jews. And Jesus responds because he shifts the conversation a little bit. If you knew the gift of God, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. Well, she's a little confused now because she's thinking of physical water. And she says to him, "Sir, you have no bucket, and the well is deep." So there's her bucket, remember? We talked about the bucket carrying maybe shame. This is the tool, the thing that she depends on for her daily life. She assumes that Jesus needs a bucket also. But Jesus is talking about something way different than physical water. He's talking about living water. He's not talking about just temporary relief, but he's talking about transformation. The theologian Augustine wrote, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until we rest in you." Jesus names that deeper thirst. Can't be satisfied in any other way. So now the conversation turns personal. Jesus says, "Go and call your husbands and then come back." Now, in this moment, in my mind, I think this could go really badly, right? I mean, think about it if it were you. I think this is the point where she could have walked away. She could have shut down this conversation because she didn't want to talk about it. And she only said, "I have no husband." Jesus responds, but he doesn't respond by shaming her. He doesn't respond by condemning her. He responds with grace. He sees her in a way that is not judging, but loved. And he sees her in a way where it's exposed, but it's not, he's still taking care of her. He's fully, completely seeing her. You know, he ignored nothing really at this point. He doesn't take away the painful, ugly, broken parts of her, but he accepts those. And so, not in Jesus' words, not in the Bible, but what he really means is stop using smoke screens. Stop playing games with me. I see you for who you are, and I love you. Theologian Karl Barth says, "To be known and not loved is our greatest fear. To be loved and not known is superficial. But to be fully known And truly loved is like being loved by God. There were two ladies driving in a car one day, and they had been together for several days. And the conversation, I'm not sure how the conversation even began, but somehow the passenger in the car said, I've done a lot of maybe not so good things, maybe some things that I'm ashamed of. And the person that was the lady that was driving said, there is nothing in this world that you could do that would make me love you less. So that's what's happening here. She's fully known. She's standing in God's presence. And then something begins to happen. She starts to move with curiosity, and she says, I see that you're a prophet. And then she starts asking these deeper questions about worship and about where to worship and about what's really true. And then Jesus reveals something extraordinary. The hour is coming when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. Not tied to the mountain, not tied to a location, not tied to a system. God is not confined. We cannot put God in a box. God is present. God is here. God is with us now. God was with her. And then comes probably one of the most powerful moments in all of Scripture. She says, I know that Messiah is coming. And Jesus said, I am he. Jesus says, I saw you in all of your goodness, in all of the things that you felt shameful for, but I truly see you, and I want you to truly see me. He's telling this to an outsider, a Samaritan woman. This is the first person in John's gospel that receives this revelation of who the Messiah is. And then something else happens that's pretty remarkable. What does she leave? She leaves her jar or her bucket. Remember, that's what we were trying to figure out, what is left. So this was the thing that she came for. This was the thing that she needed. This was the thing that helped her in her daily life. But she left it. I really like this part of the story. I think it's really exciting when she just forgets it. Something that's so important to her at that one point, right? She just forgets it. And she suddenly feels the need to run and tell the good news. She runs into a town that she avoided for a long time, right? Because she didn't want to see all those people. She didn't want to have to explain herself. She didn't want to see people talking about her. But she runs to that town. She runs to those people. And the secret and the source of her pain was what she used to tell about Jesus' identity. She used that story of hers. She runs back to the city. She didn't even want to go there at first. She runs back there as quickly as possible. And then she says, come and see. I think she didn't know what to say, but she told her acquaintances, come and see Jesus. And Jesus can change your life just like Jesus changed mine. She's a witness now. She's not just an outsider, a Samaritan, a woman. She is a witness to God's love. She doesn't have all the answers, But this encounter that she has with Jesus is the beginning of this relationship. And here's the truth for us today. What are we carrying? Are we trying to prove that we're enough? Are we playing old tapes in our head over and over again because we just can't let it go? Do we have habits that we don't really need? We keep going back to those wells, but we're not satisfied. We're still thirsty. Jesus is still sitting at the wells, meeting people in ordinary places. But you notice that Jesus doesn't rip the bucket out of our hand. He doesn't rip the pain away. He doesn't rip the shame away. He asks us to just set it down. Because transformation doesn't happen through effort. It doesn't happen through working and trying. It happens through encounter, a relationship. So what are you carrying? Are you carrying insecurities and doubts? Fears and worries? Sadness? Heartbreak? Pride or pain? What have you convinced yourself that you need that maybe you really actually could put down? Hear me, church. Know that you do not have to work harder. You don't have to pursue more. You don't have to pull yourself together. Because you can rest and you can drink the living water and you can ask the Holy Spirit to fill you, and you can ask Jesus to lead you. So let me end with the story about a gentleman who had worked for years at a factory. He was one of the maintenance guys, and he wore a tool belt. You know, he had a hammer and wrenches and screwdrivers, I don't know, whatever else you put in your tool belt. Everybody was excited for him because he'd worked there for years and years, and he was finally getting to retire. And so they had a little party for him, and he was walking out the door, and somebody called to him and said, "Hey, you don't need that tool belt anymore." And he turned around and he said, "Yeah." But he kept on walking. And then when he got home, his wife was there, and she said to him, what's happening here? Why do you have this tool belt on? You just retired. And so he didn't really know what to do, but he and his wife unbuckled that tool belt, and they laid it gently on the floor. And he said, "I don't know how to walk without it. I don't know how to walk without my tool belt." But he started feeling better, even though he was unsure. And he took one step, and then he took another step. And that's really the invitation to this story. We don't just have to hear about living water, but we can experience it. We can actually set something down. Because somewhere between the well and the village, the woman discovered something new. She discovered she didn't need her bucket anymore, and neither do we. So be it, and so it is. Amen.